learning strategy.
So thank you all for coming to the U.S. Embassy annual conference, Smart People for a Smart Economy, and welcome to this session, which is Innovating in Education. So we've got a great panel today, great view, and hopefully some great questions from the audience. So if you have any interesting observations that you make during the course of this session, or if you think one of the speakers says something particularly interesting, I encourage you to tweet it out. We're using the hashtag #Smart14, so please use that. And with that, I'm going to introduce our two moderators for this session. We've got Philip Lynch, who's the CEO of Pixel Soup, and they are an e-learning company that has a particular product called Spree School, which is pretty cool, and I'm sure will come up at some point during the conversation. And we've also got Tony Riley, who's the CEO of Gotcha Ninjas, which is a social learning platform that personalizes education. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Philip.
Thank you very much, Chris. Yeah, just a brief introduction to myself and Tony. One of the reasons that we're here is that in January, the US Embassy ran a program for EdTech where we were given an opportunity to go spend 2 weeks in the States, going around, I think it was 4 different cities from east to west coast, visiting some of the leading and bleeding edge technology companies and universities in the States. And one of the things that came out of that particular program was this event today. And Tony and I have been asked to really curate this and be moderators for this particular session because it's an area we're particularly interested in from a business development perspective, but also something that's close to our hearts. We have a panel here that I'd like to maybe just ask you all to introduce yourself very quickly, and then what we'll do is we'll get on to some of the areas that we've decided to speak about. Is that okay, Anne? We'll start with you. So, yeah, no, we'll start with you, Anne. Sorry.
My name is Anne White. I'm a primary teacher in St. Oliver Plunkett in Malahide. I teach first class, so that's 6 and 7-year-olds. I returned to teaching after 13 years. It's probably a bit generous to say it was a break. On secondment, I was on secondment to the NCCA and to the NCT, the National Centre for Technology and Education. So my perspective is now, obviously, as a primary teacher with young children, using technology in the classroom and all that comes with that.
Hi, my name is Deirdre Butler, and I actually teach in St. Patrick's College in Drumcondra. I started life as a primary school teacher and spent a long time in primary school, so I was a primary school teacher from 4 to 12-year-olds. I was also a teacher of the Travellers, resource teacher, deputy principal, and then moved into teacher education. I was always interested in technology, and that's what my students are fascinated by when I say, you know, we were using this in the classroom in the early 80s. And they're looking at you as if to say, wow, you know, what planet did you drop off? So to try and get across that sort of technologies and using technologies is not something new, and that the focus is on sort of the pedagogy. And my passion in life is actually trying to understand how we can actually use these digital technologies to transform learning, not to tinker with it, but to transform it.
My name is Lynn Scarff. I'm the director of Science Gallery, just down the road in Trinity College, Dublin. I suppose I'm slightly different on the panel in that I don't come from a kind of formal education, formal learning area. I suppose what we do in Science Gallery is much more within the informal space, but what we're really interested in is echoing what Deirdre said, transformative experiences, and creating an experience where people come to a place where they engage in technology in some form or manner, and the experience that they have is transformative and deeply participative. And I think that our interest in this whole event today and in this particular discussion is in around that blend. How do you, that blended learning idea, how do you bring those things together? How do they complement each other, and how we can support all of that activity?
My name is Bernard Kirk, as in Star Trek, K-I-R-K. I'm obviously the token male on the panel, which is unusual. And I just was saying to people the other day that I'm quite comfortable when I saw it was 3 women because I live with 3 women at home. I should explain, that's my wife and 2 daughters who are both in college now. So if you see me just sitting here going, yes, 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 agreeing with everything, you'll know that I'm just agreeing with everything. But to put that in context, I remember being in, actually in Science Gallery a while back. There was a Women in Science and Technology event. I happened to turn up and I suddenly discovered that I was the only male with 32 females in the room. And we broke in these little groups and they went around, they were asking everyone, you know, what do you do? And someone was a head researcher in this and someone else was a really professor of this. And when it came to me, I suppose, to describe myself, which is what's been used since about me, I just said, my name is Bernard Kirk, I get things done. My day job is I'm director of an education centre in Galway, so we're responsible for training, CPD of teachers. But I think Lynn last week introduced me to someone kind of described it nicely. I'm in the formal system, but spend a lot of time in that informal system because for about 15 years, we in Galway have acted as a conduit between enterprise and education, going right back to Nortel. And we work with a whole variety of companies, including Sean O'Sullivan currently on the CAN and Mathletes. And so we've been in that space looking at how can we translate, when companies come to us, their ideas into something that actually will fit into the formal education system, will tick a box, and that benefits all the kids. So that's my background.
Thank you very much. The first thing I think we have on the agenda just to discuss is digital ed tech resources and blurring the lines between traditional classroom learning and home learning. And I suppose I'd like to start really with yourself, Deirdre. If you're in this particular space since the 80s, yep. Traditionally, there's been the home, you go to school, you'd learn, you come home, do it for an hour or two on the homework, and then that was it. But there's a real move now outside of the classroom for learning and an opportunity for learning outside this. What are your thoughts as regards this outside of the classroom, and where do you think it'll go in the next couple of years?
I think what we have to look at as well is the fact that I was one of those teachers that never believed in homework because of the fact that what you did in school, you engaged it with what you actually did at home. There was far more learning that went on in the informal space. And I think we have to actually understand our students as well as to what their passions and interests are and what they actually bring into the classroom. Like I'll always remember a story, and I use stories from those who know me about my son, because I can actually talk about him, and I don't get into trouble about other kids, is the fact that he came home one time and he said, she knows nothing. She, of course, being the teacher, she knows nothing about the wind. She was talking about the Beaufort scale. He said, but she knows nothing about it. And I said, what do you mean? And he went on to explain about the different forces. And what was missing there was the fact that he was 10, but a very competent sailor. So he understood the wind. And he would have been able to explain in a very nice language and sort of from personal experiences to his own peers in the classroom what that meant. What I'm finding then about resources as well is the fact that when people talk about resources that are there, we never really totally blurred and capitalised on the lines between home and school. What I see an awful lot of the resources, and a lot of people have devices. I mean, we all have devices. Everybody comes in here, at least everybody has 3 devices minimum. But I find an awful lot of stuff that's on the devices is a lot of edutainment. There's an awful lot of stuff that's not what the kids really want. For an example, and they're very discerning about devices and what to use. I remember the race with my sister's kids when they would come in. It was who got initially the iPad, who got the laptop, who got the computer. And generally it was the younger guy got the computer because everybody wanted the iPad initially. But then it was handed back to me after the second visit by the older 2, and I said, why, what's the problem? And they said, Mark can have it. You know, and I said, why? And they said, well, it doesn't do Penguin World because it wasn't flash-based. And that was a couple of years ago, and that was all their social networking, that's what they were interested in. But I think what's wrong is the fact that we have to capitalise on what they're interested in. Strategy games, there were fantastic strategy games. My own son used to play them, like Age of Empires. That was fantastic because it was problem solving. It was long-term. He was in charge. He was able to design the things he wanted to do, and he got heavily interested in it. What I was interested in as well is the fact that when I reached a certain point, he was willing to actually stop everything, start from scratch again. And I said, why are you doing that? He said, well, I know I've gone so far, I've learnt this much, I made a mistake, 3 things back, I need to dismantle everything and go back. So they were able to undo, and they were showing, he was showing sort of symbols and sort of an expert problem solver. So we need to have, I think, resources that really engage them in their interests and their passions, and that they can actually communicate about about in and out of school. Like at the moment, like the kids are really interested in, every kid in the nation is into Minecraft. So I can't understand why schools aren't capitalising on that and aren't actually building I know some schools are, but why they're actually not building whole scenarios about it and everything else. That's what they're interested in. And they can actually begin to do anything within the Minecraft environment. So I think we have to be mindful of where the kids are at, what they're interested in, what their passions are interested in, and actually to be able to merge the formal and the informal. So sorry if it was a long-winded answer.
No, that's great. That's great. Just on the Minecraft, I mean, I have a couple of peers and their kids are into I have a 10-year-old, and the way we've described it as parents to ourselves, it's like crack cocaine for kids.
Yeah.
You know that's
totally.
you know, it's not a very flattering, but there we go. I'd like to address the next area, Anne, to yourself, and it's really to do with the bottoms-up approach. And where this is going is traditionally there's been a top-down approach, but if you take the States for example, there's a district, and traditionally an educational company would go into that district and sell down to that district, ultimately get down to the school principal, school administrator, and sell that product, whatever it may be, into the school teacher, who then enforces that into the classroom. So that's traditionally how it's been done.
In the US?
In the US, oh, yeah, and to an extent, really around the world, really, you know. Maybe not so much as fragmented as the district, but really, even from Deirdre's perspective, that there's a set of learning requirements that are set out by the curriculum that need to be met. Then you have the best sales team really will win the day, effectively. So the bottoms-up approach is a completely new thing that turns it on its head. What it means is that there are so many online resources, really, from apps that are on the App Store to online ST Maths or Khan Academy. And what's happening in the States is that there's a lot of teachers, these are heroes or people who are advocates who are for ed tech, and they start using these resources. And because they're online, they start tweeting about it, putting up Pinterest boards and things like that. You've come from a background that was almost policy making in the NCCA, and now you're back as a teacher, okay? How do you feel that policy, not so much the NCCA policy, but this new bottoms-up approach will work in a couple of years' time? What do you think of it?
Well, I think it's actually already working, and I was unsure of that until I went back in August. Now, I suppose there's a difference between, we say, the gamut of resources that are online, and then the kind of the books that you choose for, that a school chooses to assist them in working through their curriculum. Because obviously the book is our resource to support or to enhance or to help you engage with the curriculum. It is not the curriculum, it's another resource in your toolkit of resources. So from the book perspective, and they now have accompanying online resources with each book, nearly all of them have, of various different degrees and levels. So generally when people buy a book, they get the accompanying online resources. So in terms of a school, our school selects, for example, the reading scheme, having a group of teachers maybe in the whole area of reading and language would come together and look at the various different schemes or book schemes available and decide which they think is most appropriate for our school and for the various different levels. Like in our school we have, for example, at first class there are 4 first classes, so there'll be 4 first class teachers, and at the junior end we'd kind of come together and select. So that's kind of been pretty much the tradition and sort of continues. Now, for example, at junior infants and senior infants, this year they're not using any books. From September onwards, they won't be using any maths books. So they'll be using different resources. Now, I'm not saying they're all online, but a lot of different resources and more tactile and tangible maths resources and different resources that they develop themselves. From the online perspective, I mean, and I'll speak from my own experience, which is now in a school of 950 kids with extremely limited broadband with no Wi-Fi. We do have an access to a set of iPads on a rota basis served between the 950 kids. So you can imagine how often we get that, but when we do, we go for it. And Wednesday was our day, so we just went hell for leather on it. But how we select resources, and there's a team of us, probably champions of ICT in the main, who have, you know, spoken with colleagues, worked with colleagues, done their own research, evaluated pieces of content, and we choose them and we upload them to the apps, to the iPad if it's an app, or to the computer or the laptop. Or, for example, we've bought into Espresso, which is, you know, an online content resource. So we bought into that as part of our content resource offering, alongside the books, alongside the cubes, alongside whatever it is, your musical instruments. And that's how we select. But that would be quite different to how we're selecting the books. So our selection of online resources is coming, it is purely a bottoms-up model, because we're not really having people coming in saying, I think you should buy this. It's from going to conferences, meeting with other colleagues, doing our own bit of research. For example, at Christmas, we would have each taken an area, because we got the iPads, so we were looking for resources for that. And we each took an area of the curriculum and went through different apps that we thought, Symmetry Schools being one, yes, plug. I know, because it's obviously worthy of, you know, so we did our own kind of rating. And that is a bottoms-up model. And I think that's pretty much following through in an awful lot of, rather than, we'd say the model of the book companies coming in, doing their sales pitch. You don't have the same sales pitch. Well, you obviously can't, because it's so wide. And then through resources, then, you know, I use something and I share that out between the whole school, and possibly then on my own Twitter feed to other teachers in other schools or other areas. And that is a bottoms-up model, which I think is extremely healthy. It's the pace of keeping up and sharing that with colleagues then, and they say, oh, sure, I'm still experimenting with Symmetry School, for example, and you say, oh, just found this. So you have to steady the ship, and, you know, I'm the ICT coordinator in my school with a few others. So we have to steady. We can't keep loading teachers with saying, have you seen this, have you seen that? Because they're not always ready. And then, you know, you've a whole different, they're just examples, we say, from we say, sharing a website, or, you know, you've a whole load of ways of then bottoms-up model. If you've in interactive whiteboards, which all primary classrooms have, I use this. If you're using Minecraft, this is how I explored it, or you could use that, or you could use whatever it is, the Google Gether. So that is completely a bottoms-up model, which I think is very, very healthy.
Yeah, so you see that in 5 years' time it'll be more bottoms-up than anything else than
well, I think there's you know, I think it's, if the two come together, fine, but it is really healthy for somebody to say why I'm recommending Symmetry School, and why I'm recommending at first class maybe try and just keep to that level as a teacher who's practically done it in the classroom. I think there's a huge amount of professional validation in that.
Yeah,
and
rise,
yeah, and then you know, you creep up through, but you've chosen it because you've chosen it. And anything you choose to use and choose to lose, and say, actually, do you know what, I thought that was really good, but it's actually not as good as, you know, it only takes me to a certain point in the learning, so you're better off doing something else. And there are so many resources. I suppose that is maybe the conundrum, that there's so much out there, you know, and then you're trying to adjudicate. So you have to have people who are willing to take the time to adjudicate. And that's what we say, for example, the team of us within the school, but we're in a big school, took the time at Christmas to download each of the apps. I'm speaking about apps because we needed them for the iPads, to do that. But it kind of follows through on websites or all other areas. Yeah. So I think it's very healthy, but it takes a lot of time, and you need to know what you're looking for, and you're looking for different things. And you need to know your curriculum inside out, upside down. Yeah. You know, you really need to have, and anybody who's taught at different levels has an edge, because they can say, do you know, that's really good at first class, but you could also use level 3 up at 5th and 6th class, so we, you know, go for that. And I think that makes a huge difference if you're in a vertical school where you can see it running from infants up to 6th. But then, you know, there's always a new kid on the block as well, so you're constantly keeping out, which is really healthy, because for the kids then they get a great run of things. They get sort of change, you know, frequently. Yeah. So, sorry. Great.
Sorry, just on that, Lynn, my next area just to discuss is really about deep learning. It's been mentioned once this morning, and you mentioned it there in your introduction to ourselves. Could I ask you just, it's a relatively new concept. Around 2012, there was a couple of white papers written around it, and it probably has been spoken about prior to this, but really, Common Core State Standards, not to keep mentioning the states, but their whole thing is about deep learning, this immersive. Could you give us what you consider deep learning to be, in your opinion?
Well, this is interesting, Phil, because you've totally put me on the spot.
Because I deferred to Deirdre. We just had this discussion.
We just had this discussion about 5 minutes ago down at the very back of the room, and we all went, "What's deep learning? What do you think deep learning is?"
So Deirdre gave us that.
And Deirdre gave us a quick,
synopsis
it's about kind of, Deirdre's synopsis was not going inch down, mile wide, but that you're really kind of focusing down on something. I suppose maybe rather than going into depth about deep learning, because I don't actually feel like I'm in any way qualified to speak about it in any great depth, I think if it's okay, I could speak about it in the context, I think, of what the other guys are talking about, which is interesting, going back to this whole question of technology in classrooms and, you know, what it can do and how it can help. And I think there's been a few points already that both Anne and Deirdre brought up that I find really interesting, being kind of slightly removed from it, in the terms of I'm not in a classroom. You know, I'm not dealing with the bombardment of technologies and apps and opportunities that teachers that are at the coalface every day are dealing with. But what does I suppose strike me in this context is a few things. Is the kind of aspect of what students are doing outside of school and what they're bringing into school, and how what teachers are doing outside of school and what they're bringing into school. And I think both Anne and Deirdre's points about that community aspect of how we learn, and I think that goes back again to this idea of deep learning, you know, that there's a lot of recent studies that have been done that actually show that the amount of time that we spend in formal education is comparatively, you know, around the kind of 18% mark in terms of our whole lifelong learning, you know. So thinking about that in a broader context and the opportunities that we have the whole way through learning, there's something about all of this conversation that strikes me about trust. And it's about trust around Deirdre's son, who knew more about wind than his teacher, and around trusting teachers to know what it is that will suit their students, and trusting students to know what will suit them in terms of learning. And I wonder, is there something that we've missed yet about how we trial out technology in schools that I'm kind of interested in as a kind of broader organisation as well, in terms of, you know, when all of these new apps arrive and new technology comes on the scene, is there a way that we can enable all of the people who are in our learning community to trial things out and feed back into that system in a way that it becomes sustainable, in a way that actually, as an informal organisation, I could be helping schools. So I know I've totally taken us totally off the track of deep learning, and Deirdre will speak about that now.
I think what's very important, what you brought up there, is the whole thing of trust, and I don't think we actually sort of appreciate how much that is necessary within an education system, in the fact that we need, first of all, to trust our teachers. We actually need to have an environment where they feel trusted and where they feel safe. Even as regards sort of, you know, when I listened this morning, we were talking about disruptive environments and adaptability and not being afraid of change and taking a risk. Now, it depends on where you are in the system as to how much you are empowered to take a risk and what's going to be the fallout of taking that risk. And are you going to be supported in that risk-taking? You know? I mean, I was lucky enough as well to be in a school where, like Padder, didn't know anything about technology, recognised that I had passion, and I think that's what we're all sort of missing as well sometimes as well. I think what's informing and sort of underneath how we live is a passion. That's what actually keeps us moving, that's what keeps us driving. You know, and the fact that when I made a promise to my son at 6, you know, by the time, you know, you actually get to leaving cert, you know, it won't be there. He's now 24. I didn't manage to do that, but the fact that when he came home and it was a case of sort of, you know, you're wasting my life. Why am I wasting your life? All you do in school all day is colour, colour, colour. You know, if she wanted coloured pictures, why didn't she buy them? You know, so that sort of thing of sort of, you know, what was the purpose of it? And that's the thing about deep learning. You know, what is the passion that's actually driving that learning? Why should I be engaged? How do I ignite that fire? You know, as Yeats, and I'm just looking at a quote over there, you know, Yeats had said, you know, like sort of, you know, education is not the filling of a pail, but the lighting of a fire. And how can we actually sort of light that fire, keep it stoked, and actually keep it going? Because we actually have to, they talked as well this morning about grit and perseverance. Well, we have to develop as well as resilience, you know, and that ability to be able to be resilient, to actually face change, not to get fazed by it, to actually say, okay, didn't go great that time, what would I do the next time? That's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about the strategy games. Do you know what I mean? Didn't go great that time. Okay, can we just uncouple it? Can I go back? Where did I actually sort of, go wrong? What did I learn from that? And even society's opinion and understandings of children and their understandings of teachers as well. What's expected of them. Like, you'd often hear that thing, oh, we're having a pub quiz. You're a teacher, Bernard. You can be on our team. As if you're going to be the font of all knowledge. You're going to know everything. Maybe we need to look at sort of our profession as learning professionals. That we understand the business of learning. And that's what we're in the business of. We're in the business of designing learning environments. Like down in the Science Gallery, you're designing a learning environment where people engage with ideas. That's what we do in schools. We should be designing learning environments. So when we're actually looking at technologies and sort of the things and tools we're going to use, the apps or whatever, we have to decide what sort of learning environment am I actually going to design? What do I need to put in place? Who needs to be with me or help me to actually engage in that learning environment? And more importantly as well, sort of who are the actors and players that participate in that learning environment? And what are the underpinning principles that are informing my decisions about how I design that learning environment? And how do we actually, like, people then say, well, teachers, they need to engage, there's new change coming up, the junior cycle, curriculum and everything else. You're expecting those people as well to do a complete and utter about turn. For eons, they're expected to actually do something in a certain way. Parents are expected, the school is set up that way, the learning environment is set up that way. How are we going to support teachers to design new learning environments? How do we actually put them in situations where they learn themselves, where it's expected and enabled that they should be learning? And how do we actually create environments where they actually are sort of, oh my God, I never realized that. It's a little story, and then I'll pass to somebody else. We were involved in a project going back when Mick and John there were in the NCTE eons ago, and it was one of the SIP projects, okay, in 1998, and Bernard has done an awful lot of work as a result, sort of developing from it as well, we were looking at robotics, and it was a project called Empowering Minds, and I remember Seamus at the time, Seamus Knox tearing his hair out in clumps and saying to me, you're the reason I'm baldy like this. And he's saying, what do you mean robotics with 7 and 8-year-old kids? Do you know what I mean? And I said, yeah, we need to move away from the technologies. Everybody thinks technology is a computer, We need to actually think of sort of, digital stuff. And these are robotics, thinking of very different ways. Shift people out of their comfort zone so that they begin to think in different ways. So I had the privilege of working with Seymour Papert and the Media Lab Europe was here. And we actually set up learning environments for teachers where they were very different, where there was no curriculum, where there was no instructions in the box, where you had to design stuff from scratch. And I remember teachers sitting around, and I remember looking at this teacher, and it was such a misnomer. Like, this teacher was called Techie. She was the least techie person in the world, do you know what I mean? But that was her nickname because it was a Greek name originally. And she was looking, and I was watching her as she was trying to do something, and you'd intervene and sort of, ask the probing question and sort of move back. The thing of stepping in and stepping out, in a learning environment. I remember going down, and I said, "Are you okay, Techie?" And she was looking up at 2 of the other teachers. She said, "No, I hate them." And I said, "Do you really?" She said, "Yes." She said, "They drive me nuts." She said, "There they are, they're little boys, and they're doing this, and they know everything." She said, "And I can't get this thing to work." And it should be easy. They have it. They're doing it. And she said, "And I know I'm not stupid, and I still can't get this thing to work." And she said, "It's only now that I've been sitting here thinking, I have been thinking of all the kids I have put through my hands, and I thought something was really easy, and I couldn't understand how they couldn't understand it. And now," she said, "I feel now what they felt. The difference is," she said, "I know I'm not stupid." What were those kids, what was the message those kids were getting? So that's what I'm saying, is the fact that sometimes that teachers have to be in an environment where they actually are placed in a situation where their beliefs, assumptions, attitudes are rattled. But she was in a safe environment. We could talk about that then. When we every day after doing the workshop sessions, we would sit down in the evening and talk about the things we learned during the day and how we felt and how it relates to the curriculum and kids and learning, etc. That group is still going. They are actually what we call self-determined learners. They were supported initially, very heavily supported initially by me, the NCTE, the college, the Media Lab and everything else. But then they became a self-determined learning group who actually supported one another's, and they actually went on to do very different things. And some of them are really key figures in education and different things. But we have a robo show every year. The only thing I have to do is get the premises in the college. Everybody else, they just do it. And that's what happens when you invest in people. And I think that's what's necessary as we move forward. We need to shift our emphasis off their device. Do you know what I mean? And we need to actually start thinking on how do we support people to design effective learning environments so that these people can go out into the world where they actually are resilient, they have grit, they have perseverance, they're critical thinkers, problem solvers, and able to actually face the challenge of change and adapt. And I think that's what we need to try and do. And teachers are central to it.
Brilliant. Thanks very much.
Sorry, Phil, before you ask me a question which I can't answer, can I pull on a few of the points that you've talked about there? Because I think what, everyone said here, and I think, Lynn, you've put your finger on something. We talk a lot, the theme here is innovating in education, and we talk a lot about trust. Because I suppose we've worked ourselves in a space in Galway education over the last 14, 15 years where we now have the trust of the companies that we deal with in enterprise. But more so, we have the trust of the teachers. And I think this happened, we had a conversation yesterday where you were asking me, and I was to say, yeah, look, I'll ring 5 teachers next week and trial that for you, and I'll get feedback. Because the teachers know if I'm going to them asking them to do something, there's no financial benefit to me. I'm a teacher, I'm in the system, I get my salary, and that's it. And I go back to the people and we'll say that worked or that didn't work. And what you're saying there, I think what we need to do, we would just describe ourselves sometimes, which might sound quite crazy, as a skunk works, because we trial things. So Deirdre had laid the platform on Mindstorms for many years. We came along, we now run what's called the First Lego League, which is robotics with Mindstorms for 9 to 16-year-olds. We then were asked to take on what's called We Do for 6 to 9-year-olds, which is junior version of Lego. Yeah. Now, we didn't go off and buy 20 kits. We bought one kit, put it into school, Kate Murray in Clontuskert. She trialed it. She came back and said, Bern, if you're going to do this properly, you've got to get 30 sets of this. And I'm saying, I haven't costed that in, so I had to bring forward funding from the following year to this year. Then, after trialing it with her for a year, we were able to move it on into other schools because, going back to your point earlier and the point Anne was making, in Ireland, research really, to some extent it matters, but what really matters is teacher recommendation. If teachers tell you, yes, that works in my classroom, other teachers will take it on. And particularly like in any organisation, if there are key teachers tell you that works in their classroom, and we have a number of them here who are on Twitter and various places, others will take it on. CESI are brilliant for that. So that's actually the main kind of conduit getting out there. But you've got to use, like you said, you've got to get it to someone who then moves it on. Real example of bottom up, just to take another theme you had. Tomorrow, and I'd like to make this clear because I went up to Margaret Ward at the end of the conference because my hand was up to say, teachers are not on strike.
No.
Right, they are not on strike. Yes, there is a problem with the junior cycle, but it's nothing to do with technology, which was a response from one of the other people on stage. It's nothing to do with that. We tomorrow in Galway have 200 second level students. We have 30 teachers. Some of them are travelling overnight. Some of them are leaving at 5 o'clock tomorrow morning to get in Galway and won't be back until 10 o'clock tomorrow night. They're coming for a mini sumo robot competition. Not my idea originally. Declan Askin, a teacher in Castlebar, who's been involved and won the First Lego League a number of times, said, hey, let's take it to the next level. Let's get the kids to make their own robots. This is real technology. This is where they're programming it themselves, they build it themselves, they CNC route it themselves. And last year, we brought in 10 schools. We ran it in the centre. Again, trialled it. The teachers came in on Saturdays, got trained on Saturdays, and then gave them the basis to work on. It's on a Genie board. The kids came up with amazing robots, absolutely amazing. And the great thing was over half of the participants were girls. Tomorrow, we've doubled it. That's all we wanted to do this year. We've taken it to Radisson, and we have 64 robots. There'll be 4 16s. and by half 2, we'll have an All-Ireland winner. Now, that's a bottom-up, because that was an idea that came from a teacher, trialed in his own classroom, then brought with a number of schools. But another part of it, which is key, is teacher training, because you've got to get that teacher training element in. No point in creating something, giving it out to teachers, unless you provide them with the training as regards where this will work in their classroom. So I'm just putting a few themes there.
Can I jump in again? On that note, I mean, one of the things that strikes me about a few conversations today is this kind of business industry, you know, skills for the future aspect, what's happening within our education system, young people going through. And all of these conversations seem to be driving to one key aspect, which is, and everybody here has said it as well, is that you need confident learners. You know, we're in a, you know, in a situation where we don't know what the next big industry is going to be. You know, the people who are going to be entering the workforce now are probably going to still be working by 2070. How are we to know what that is? And we would be making a huge error if we put all of our resources into focusing on devices, technology, specific aspects. What we should always be focusing on, in my mind, is the learning environment, is the key skills that you want in a confident learner, is how do you create students who are coming out of a system who are confident, who feel that they, because the reality of it is that Leaving Cert students that are leaving today aren't going to be in the same career for 4, of course they're not, you know, they're going to be jumping careers because they're going to have to. And so how do you facilitate that? And the technology should be supporting that. It should, I suppose my point is, it should never be starting from the device, the technology, the app. The learning experience, from my reckoning, shouldn't be from there. That should be really a support that's helping you, or helping a teacher, or you know, helping ourselves in the Science Gallery in some way get to deliver what that model of learning that we feel is really important is. And I suppose just on that, for, you know, in Science Gallery we talk about 3 principles underlying all of our programs. One is that they have to connect with young people's lives, because our audience is 15 to 25-year-olds. You know, there's no point in us doing something that, you know, someone in that age group that doesn't speak to them. You know, there has to be a real moment where they participate. And the last thing is, and believe you me, without question the most trickiest, is surprise. Is that we have to surprise the people who walk into the Science Gallery. And teachers have to do this every single day, effectively. You know, they're constantly working with their students to create that passion. And my concern would be that sometimes I feel like we go down a rabbit hole of all of these new devices and technology, and we get very much trapped by, you know, should we all have iPads in our schools, or should we have Android systems, or should we have laptops, or should we have computers, and is the Wi-Fi going to deliver the thing? That can lead to nowhere. So in many respects, I wonder if the conversation should come back out of the rabbit hole and say, well, what kind of learners do we want, and how can technology support that, and how can, in the context of this day of talks, how can business and corporates feed into that? How can they support that as well?
And that's deep learning.
Just a quick one on that. I mean, an example we have currently of that is that we've about 110 kids coming in every Saturday in Galway to the Khan Academy free classes. So they're driving an hour and a half from Portdumna on one side, an hour and a half from Commas, to sit down for an hour and a half. But it's not really Khan Academy, it's the love of maths. Because what we found with these kids is, I mean, they could do this from at home. But actually, because suddenly they've realized that there are other kids in other schools who love maths. Because quite often you're the only 1 or 2 in a class who loves maths. These are 5th and 6th class kids. They're coming in, they're in their football gear, their rugby gear, their dancing gear, because they're in and then they're off out again onto whatever it is. But it's going back to you say, we've got to find what, Mary McAleese a number of years ago, we did Crest for the Science Awards, and at the event she talked about what we got to do is provide opportunities for young people. Yeah. Because all of us here have a different interest. If we had the same interest, life would be boring. So we got to find what's that opportunity within every young person that triggers an interest. We had a kid in school who has become amazing at skipping in 4th class. His academic results and everything in his whole life suddenly changed because the other kids suddenly saw, wow, he's good at something. We've had it with autistic kids who, you know, won prizes wrote books that were fantastic, and everyone else suddenly stood back and said, actually, they are good at something we never thought. And we all know if we suddenly find, hey, we're confident, and this is going back to the person. If we're a confident person, we know we're good at something really, that we can be passionate about it, all the other skills will fall in place.
It also increases participation as well in learning. And the fact that when we were actually engaged in projects in school as well, is the fact that the kids really became engaged, they connected, they became passionate about something, and even school attendance, particularly, I'm thinking of one particular school in a socioeconomic area in Dublin where kids weren't coming to school. But there was this project, it happened every Tuesday and Thursday. We looked at attendance records, and guess what? Attendance records were on the days that the project was happening. And kids didn't drop out. Even the JLO officer in the guards said, whatever's going on in there, keep doing it. Because our actual sort of, crime rates are down and the kids are not around the place. So it works once they're passionate and engaged. And that's what we have to say, that's what deep learning is. It's having deep connections with something. Rather than this, as you said before, this sort of inch deep and mile wide, it's sort of teach less, learn more.
Yeah. I'm just pushed for time. It's a quarter, so we've got about 15 minutes of Q&A. So I'm going to pass the mic around to Tony now.
Okay, we're going to come for a wander in a few seconds, but I've got a couple of questions for the panel. And in particular, you were talking earlier on about the amount of resources that are online or out there and the amount of time it takes and to have a good knowledge of the curriculum. Do you think there's a role because you've worked with the NCCA, do you think there's a role in the department as a curator to spot these tools and to recommend, or?
Well, the department is already doing that through SchoolNet, we say, through yes and no. I mean, it's just, like, I would still consider us in our school to be best positioned at this stage because we have a cohort of teachers that we trust and know, and I have others in my position to make judgments. But then on the other hand, it's handy if somebody has collated a few. But I wouldn't say it's a sine qua non. I think you have to have the choice. For us, it's working really well because we're making choices and we're deleting them as quick as as if we make a decision, so we delete it and we don't have to ramble through it again or whatever. But so, and I suppose just to add to that point, people's perception of technology, the application of technology in education as well, each teacher's perception of the application of it can vary radically. So, you can have a teacher who's mad into robotics, but another teacher, still a brilliant teacher and still a massive amount of deep learning, but may not take to robotics and may not want to explore that. And that's absolutely fine in the same way that you have a teacher, I suppose from a primary perspective, that's just particularly brilliant at music. So that class is going to get a deep level of learning in music because they have that innate, almost musical disposition. Whereas, the next teacher might not, but they'll get something else. So in the swings and roundabouts. So you don't all have to do robotics because it may not be your thing. And so I think the application, I'm not criticising robotics in any way, but you know what I mean? There's so many different applications of technology that there is no one size fits all. And there's no one size, and every teacher's sole being is quite, like how I teach is quite different to the teacher next door. How she organises her desk is radically different to mine. Mine could have like a pile, it's tidy by the end of the week, but she couldn't work that way. So, you have to take all that, and different kids work in different ways, and some of them work superbly well in groups, some find that difficult, and they have to really learn how to work in groups from a very young age upwards. So I think that's really important, but the curation, I use SchoolNet, but I do my own thing, so I suppose there's a role for both. It's nice to have it. Yeah. If it was taken away, maybe I'd be able to make a decision on that one faster or a comment faster. But I think the actual process of evaluating resources and choosing them for your own school is actually a very healthy, professional, educational process in of itself, because you're actually thinking about, will I use this, especially if you have to pay for it. If it's only free, you don't have the same thing. But then you're using up space if you have to delete one, so you say, well, something else has come along better. So you make that judgment. And I think that professional judgment is what's different to maybe 20 years ago when people just chose the book, stuck with it for the year, or maybe 5 years, or maybe 10 years.
So it's more personal. Yeah. Much more personal.
Yeah.
Excellent, thanks. That leads on to my final question before we go open it to the floor. There is a trend in the States at the moment, which is really interesting, of getting teachers into a space with designers and developers and tech people. And the teachers are the ones that are actually creating the resources with those
Yeah.
Do you think there'd be a passion for that here, or do you think there'd be an interest, or what's your opinion on that?
Yeah,
It's
I
kind
mean,
of
it
going
could
on, isn't it?
Yeah, I think
I think 20 phone calls in the morning, 20 teachers would be interested. So I mean, that's just off the top of my head. Yeah.
Hasn't the
You'll
NDRC been doing stuff?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think in any space, and then going back, I mean, whether it's tech or whether it's, because just it happens tomorrow night, we've 66 kids, we've an anthology they're writing, we're launching tomorrow night, thankfully the minister down here. And again, that would mean that they're like 66 schools because they're individuals. There must be teachers in each of those that are passionate about writing, which obviously means you get to sit down with them and then you feed into the tech part of it. So
You could go a step further and have the students in the room as well.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
think that's,
yeah.
yeah.
Which,
That would be.
that's really sticky.
I think that's an interesting part of the curation, you know, where when we did take them home to kind of get the iPads bumped up, we say for the term, there were a few kids had identified apps that they'd use at home that I had looked at then subsequently. And that is an interesting dialogue to have. Our parents might come in and say to you, you know, he's using that at home, or is that educationally sound, or, you know, and questions like that. And by that way you kind of find out, oh, jeepers, actually, I didn't know about that, or maybe that is useful. But I think then you have the whole kind of content creation part where you come from like digital video or audio and the various tools around all of that. That's a whole other aspect, which is probably not what happens in the home necessarily. But project work lends itself nicely to somebody mentioned the homeschooling curation, where they're doing a project at home and they can use the internet for research or for creating whatever it might be, their own still biography or autobiography or whatever it might be, you know, a multimedia approach. So I think you would always have interest. I mean, teachers do a lot of that. Like, I think this only has happened because it's a technology space. For example, in music, people curate songs that you'll teach for each level or rhythmic things at primary level, and it has naturally happened, but they don't necessarily put on the same hat when it comes to a digital thing. It's more selective, and I suppose it's because the digital thing is more as a resource where you kind of have to teach songs and composition, so therefore you'll make it your business to find out. So I suppose that attitudinal thing has to change a little bit in terms of how we as teachers see the real value to learning of technology. That still is very much, and I didn't actually realise this till I went back, but I would say that is at its infancy in Ireland. I thought it was further ahead in terms of our attitudinal thing. There is still, that's very nice letter at it, you know.
Yes, there's a challenge.
Yeah, so there is still a long, long way to go. And just my final word is, sorry, I do think pre-service, like I'm just bamboozled by the disparity among different graduates from different colleges. I'm not going to name and blame or anything, but it is amazing to see how some know so much more and some know so much less, if anything, or have any interest in even learning how to apply. So, and the whole ages thing is I mean, you've experienced teachers, there's one in the audience here now retired, and it's probably a better expert than any of us put together in this room. So the pre-service really needs to up its game big time, because they should be coming out with a better, their disposition should be much more even across the board for all graduates.
Right, so the pressure's on there. I'm going to go this way, because they keep looking over here at people then in particular. So I'm just wondering, are there any questions over here that the audience would like to ask? No? I'm going to go this way then. And I'm going to come back over here because there must be at least one. So guys over here, are there any questions that you'd like to ask? Oh, right next to me. Right.
Thanks, Tony. Just struck by, we had some great descriptions there of deep learning, but most of them seem to happen outside of the formal education system or more informal. I'm just wondering, what do you think it's possible to achieve deep learning in the formal system without actually trying to change the system as it is at the moment?
I think the primary school system as it's structured does enable the possibility of structuring learning environments to attain deep learning. Second level system, I think there's a conundrum in the fact that it is driven by a certain type of assessment. It's not impossible if you work creative insubordination, as I always say. There's ways and means of getting around everything. And I think if kids, like, put it this way, what always struck me was, again, as I say, when my own son was in school, he was really interested in sport. And it always struck me that they never actually joined the dots You know, that there were these kids who were really, really into sport. And they, as a consequence, were really into nutrition because they had to sort of feed the body. You know, the whole thing, I was sick buying turkey and chicken breasts and all sorts of stuff for their protein. And I had to have so many things of protein, grams of protein per body kilo and the whole bit. But I mean, that was, and then sugar and, you know, high GI and low GI. I could never understand why the chemistry teachers hadn't pounced on it. You know, how the chemistry teachers hadn't devised a module, you know, with the real sort of science geeky kids. A lot of these were sports people as well, but the science geeky kids could really have done out the nutrition programs for all these other guys, and the guys who are really into tech and video editing and everything else, how they weren't out actually videoing instead of muggins that didn't know anything about rugby, trying to video it. Do you know what I mean? How the geeky guys weren't out sort of, you know, videotaping it. And then that the other kids went into analysing it, and then the mathematics behind it, you know, all the statistical analysis. Now you had some really deep learning. You had and it was all focused around real live problem solving. And you had science, and you had maths, and you had technology, that there's your STEM in action, you know, and you had your sport. Now, so it's a way of looking at the world, and a way of saying, how can we enable learning? And, you know, move beyond sort of, and this is the textbook and we're on page 26. It's a case of what are the big ideas? How do we engage people in learning? So I think it's an attitudinal, and I think it's a way of actually, you know, taking people out and actually saying, how do we do this? How do we actually create exciting learning environments, you know? And how do we actually create exciting learning environments for teachers? You know, rather than the drive-by workshops, you know, and that we'll take them out for a day at a time, you know, and we'll take the English teachers this time, and we'll take the maths teachers this time. Hey, listen, be inventive. You know, let's look at designing sort of, you know, professional development for teachers where we'll actually, there's a great book, 20 word problems and, you know, 20 years to solve them. Let's tackle one of these problems. Throw the teachers in a room and say, okay, design a module. What always strikes me is, you know, is that film, you know, Apollo. Is it Apollo 11 or Apollo 13? Apollo 13. You know, where they're up there and they're stuck. And the guy comes in to the fellas that are down there, and he has all the bits that they have up there. And he throws the bits on the table and he says, failure is not an option. And then it was a case of, okay, guys, problem solving. And it's that thing of problematizing something and making something interesting. You know, and that you want to get up and get into school. To actually sort of, you know, and you feel you're making a difference. You know, these kids need to feel they're making a difference as well, and that they're not being acted on, but they actually are part of the process. So I think, yeah, we do need to change, but I think there's a way of we actually have to think about how we can create an exciting learning environment for everybody, teachers, students, parents, everybody.
Can I just say, John, I think there's a role in both. I think that for some programs we've been involved in, I've said to people, no, keep it outside the system, because if you bring it into the system, it just will die. I think there are others that you can start outside the system and then can influence the system. I think Science Gallery is a brilliant example of that, where you're kind of in that both spaces, particularly for that age group. Because as you mentioned, yeah, primary we can do a lot.
Second level.
Second level is really challenging. I think when you look at it, all the research shows we teach the way we learn ourselves. So if we have to get 550 points to get into training college, we have soaked up, we have regurgitated. We think this is the way of success. We go into training college, we do the same. So when we come out, we meet the kids, this is the way we're going to act. Some research a number of years ago, I remember one teacher in our school who was always looked on as being, you know, the one who was like bouncy fruitcake, wow, but off the wall. But she was an activist learner when I did some research on her. And when I had sixth class, and I asked the kids to give feedback during the school time on which teacher influenced them most, and it was the word influence. She was the one in first class. And when he asked them why, because she taught us we were all the same, because she taught us we liked each other, because she taught us. So, you know, that's a big conundrum. But I do think, yes, certain things work outside, certain work in time, and certain times, like in the science gallery, you can do a crossover and training. So again, it's providing opportunities. It's not a one-fit model.
Hi, I'm Bianca. I'm a primary school teacher, and I suppose I have a real interest in pre-service and in-service training when it comes to this, because I think the more teachers you get, you know, light a fire under, the better, you know, instead of going into smaller classrooms. But I was listening to some people earlier talking about in the future, and will teachers be teachers, or will they be mentors or coaches, or will they have that name? So I suppose my question is about what do colleges of education, and what needs to happen in pre-service to make this happen, or to where do they need to start, or what do they need to do, or where would your advice be in terms of the training for the pre-service teachers now?
Can I just jump in on it, which is that point, and then I'll hand it over to the experts on the in-service thing. But just linking back to that second level point about the second level system, we often really focus, I think, and wrongly I feel, second level, you know, is the problem, and there is a huge amount of problems there. But there is also the fact that the system is driven from where people are going, and you know, if the universities turned around tomorrow and said, no more CAO, not having it anymore, what we want you to do is we want you to do this, and then you have to do an interview, and you need to bring a portfolio and so on, then the whole system, bang, radically changes straight away, because then the teachers are teaching towards something else. Teachers are doing what they have to do because they've got to get people towards exams. And then going back, linking that to your in-service question, I would say that, you know, and Deirdre and Bernard, the teachers, we have an amazing caliber of primary school teachers because of the level of points that you have to get into primary school teaching, right? But they've gone through that system, and then you're expecting you're expecting them to learn differently than the way that they had to learn to get to the place where they're teaching the people who. So there's a few points in the cycle that have to be addressed. Sometimes I feel we just focus in on one, which I think is.
Yeah, I suppose that's the reason, Bianca, that I actually went into teacher education, because I was actually in a school, and I was VP in a school, and I was heavily involved in the education centre, West Dublin Education Centre, etc., and was doing a lot of teacher in services, as it was known at the time. And I said, look, the only way I'm actually going to affect change is if I actually get into third level and teacher education, okay? Then when you get into the system there, you can see then that it's actually sort of, you know, hampered down by a lot of things. We actually try and design different learning environments for our students. They, again, we've to uncouple what you've just said, is the fact that they've come through. I'd be going home and I'd be nearly tearing my hair out in clumps and saying, designed, you know, this thing, and I'm trying to get them engaged and into dialogue and talking and understanding, and they're sitting like sacks of potatoes. And I keep then, Donald, my son at home, keeps saying, keep your hair on, ma'am, keep your hair on. They've gone through a system whereby 6 years they've been told, you've no opinion. You know, just give them back what they want. Will you give them time to come out of it? You know, and maybe, you know, by the end of it, they'll come out. So yeah, it takes a lot of time. You have to design very different learning environments as well for them, that they actually engage in a different way. And they actually have time to stand back and reflect. Our problem is then as well trying to position them in schools where they're actually seeing exciting things happen. And then to actually try and develop a system where they realise that this is the beginning of a journey. And that's where the teaching council will have to come into play as well. And, you know, design that framework that they're talking about for a long time, where they'll actually have a professional. And rather than looking at it, and I'd ban the word training, because the people who know me know I break out in a rash when I hear the word training. They actually to design a professional learning framework, because we're in the business of learning, and it's a lifelong thing, and that there are different stages, and they're only beginning a journey, and that there is a framework where there's an expected amount of professional credits, where you're supposed to, you know, and there's a reason for you to stay engaged. And that there maybe being imaginative. Maybe there's time where maybe the ed tech people can help out as well. Maybe there are things like sabbatical internships, where people go out and actually work in very different environments. Because a lot of teachers have come through the system. You were lucky; you went in as a mature student, okay? But a lot of people come in through the system. They've been very successful in first and second level. They go straight into college. They then come out of college and they go back into school. Do you know what I mean? and came to us as a mature student as well. Do you know what I mean?
And I'm still going around in circles.
But I mean, the thing is that, you know, you need to have experience of different things. If you as an individual don't get experience of many different environments, you can't think in a different way to actually design a different learning environment. So we all need to be rattled, we all need to be stopped in our tracks, and we all need to think, how could I do this in a different way? So that's what we're trying to do. But then you're dealing as well with, you know, big numbers. They're trying to actually enable the same university structure onto a teacher preparation. And they're trying to say, well, you only need X number of sort of, you know, lecturers. And we're saying, but we don't lecture, we try to work in small groups. We have to design very different learning environments. We don't haul the 400 of them into a hall and lecture at them. And that's time intensive. So they're going to have to resource pre-service teachers. And I keep saying this all the time because I will actually be all the time the advocate for the teacher. They are your linchpin, they're your change agents. They will be the people who will actually turn this country around, because they are the people, and I'll always have it, I still have it at home, my grandmother bought it for me, to teach is to touch a life forever. And they're the people, like that teacher that Bernard talked about, they will interact, they're the direct interaction with those kids, and they will create the dispositions to turn this country around. So I think they have to be invested in hugely, at all levels, not just pre-service, all the way up.
And could I just add to that by saying, the person who asked the question is someone, if you follow on Twitter, you will see innovation in the classroom. You will see excitement in the classroom. You will see what we all wish to see in a classroom. That's Bianca, and I was thrilled to see you on the agenda today. So well done.
Great stuff. Thanks very much, Ben. Look, I was really sorry we have to finish now. We could discuss the issues all afternoon, and we'd like to thank the US Embassy for facilitating this discussion this afternoon as well, and Philip for leading it. So that's it. We'd more like to thank you guys for being up there and actually fronting up and talking about what's going on in education. So we'll give a round of applause for the panel, please.
Thank you.